Quick note for everyone, please put on your masks. And the most important part of this process is putting it on your face and not on some other part of your body with, well, more or less different location. It's extremely important because otherwise we are at risk of not starting the talk, which gathered all of you here, not only this one, but still. In the very beginning of the talk, we will have a 13 minutes video, which will be continued with the, well, you know, offline talk of Richard. Okay? Almost ready. Mm-hmm.
These bright lights. I'll talk. I'll talk. I'll talk. So bright. Oh, well. I'll get used to it somehow. So, everyone must wear a mask here. And it has to go over your nose and over your mouth. And bend the mask at the top so it fills in these corners on both sides of your nose. That's needed for it to work. But the other thing is, keep distant from each other. You know, fill up the space in the room at least. Oh, is there any way to get more ventilation in here? Are there any doors we could open to get air coming through? Because ventilation is necessary for safety. Is there any way of getting more air coming through here? Are there any doors we can open? Is there a door over there? Can we open it to the outside and have air come through? Try it. Try it. You know, try opening things. See if you can. This is not a good place to hold a talk, I'm sad to say. Don't know what it is. In any case, if you see somebody who doesn't have a mask on, please say, put someone near you who doesn't have a mask on, say, please put a mask on or get away from me. I got to be very concerned about this. You see, if I have an asymptomatic case of COVID-19, I will be blocked from traveling on, and that would be a big problem even if I never feel the slightest bit sick. So, anyway, I'm here to talk about free software and the GNU General Public License. But first, to introduce it, I'd like you to start the video. Free software is the first battle in the liberation of cyberspace. Who controls your computer? Is it you? Or is it some big company that's really controlling it? Well, what is a computer? A computer is a universal machine.
It will do any computation you want it to because you give it a program that says what the computation is that you want. So the computer only knows how to get out an instruction and do it, and get out another instruction and do it. The program has the instructions. It says what to do. So by writing the right program, you can make it do anything. Well, almost anything. So who gives the instructions to your computer? You might think it's obeying your instructions when really it's obeying somebody else first, and you, only as much as that company wants it to, will let it listen to you. With software, there are two possibilities. Either the users control the program or the program controls the users. It's inevitably one or the other. So in order for the users to control the program, they need the 4 essential freedoms. And that's the definition of free software. Free software respects the user's freedom and community. Now, we often call it libre, using the French or Spanish word, pronounce it as you like. The point is, that's what we mean. We don't mean it's gratis. We're not talking about price. We're concerned with your freedom. And we sometimes say free/libre to show that. So freedom 0 is the freedom to run the program as you wish for whatever purpose. Freedom 1 is the freedom to study the source code of the program and change it so it does the computing you want it to do. But what is the source code? Well, every program typically will have 2 forms. There's the form that you can read and you can understand if you know the programming language. That's the source. That's what programmers write and change. Then there's the executable, which is a bunch of numbers which even a programmer can't figure out. If all you get is the executable, it's a horrible pain in the neck to figure out what it does, and even harder to change it. So to give you the real possibility to study and change it, they've got to give you the source code. That's a requirement. Well, with those 2 freedoms, each user separately can make a copy and start changing it and make it do what she wants. That's individual control. But what if you're not a programmer? You look at the source code and you don't understand it. Individual control isn't enough. We also need collective control, which means any group of users are free to work together to adapt the program to what they want. Of course, in the group, some of them are programmers. They're the ones who actually write the changes, but they're doing it as part of the group for what the group wants. Of course, the group doesn't have to be everybody. So others can use it some other way. They're all free to do that. So collective control requires 2 more essential freedoms. Freedom 2 is the freedom to redistribute exact copies, to make the copies and then give them away or sell them when you wish. And freedom 3 is similar, but it's for your modified versions. You're free to make copies and then give them or sell them when you wish. So if you do have these freedoms, then it's free software. The users control the program. But if any of those freedoms is missing, then the users don't control the program. Instead, the program controls the users, and the developer controls the program. So that means this program is an instrument of unjust power for its developer over the users. That means the users don't have freedom. That's non-free proprietary software, which we got to get rid of. Well, when you've got proprietary software, what happens? Sometimes the program snoops on the user. Sometimes it tracks the user. Sometimes it restricts the user and stops users from doing what they want to do. You can see that the blue ray is your enemy. Sometimes the software remotely deletes books, as Amazon did with 1984. Sometimes the developer compels users to install a harmful upgrade by threatening to take away other functionality if it's not installed, as Sony did. And sometimes they can even forcibly change the software at a distance, as Microsoft can with Windows through the universal backdoor. So sometimes they even sabotage users, as Microsoft does when it tells the NSA about bugs in Windows so it can use them to attack people's computers. Well, what you get is basically with proprietary software, the owner has power over the users and takes advantage of this power, putting in those various malicious functionalities to hurt the users. Of course, they don't do this because they're sadists. They're doing it just for money, for greed. They have various ways that they can profit from having this power over users, which does not make it even the tiniest bit less evil. But they have no shame about it. They have conferences where they talk about the latest ways they can take advantage of users through the power they have. Basically, proprietary software, which is now from almost all the users of proprietary software, they're using proprietary malware. It's software for suckers. So how do you stop being the victim? Formerly, you had to stop using computers, but not anymore. Now you can come join us in the free world that we've built. In 1983, I announced I would develop a completely free software operating system called GNU. In 1992, we had it almost finished, but one piece was missing, the kernel. Linus Torvalds in that year freed his kernel Linux, which filled the last gap and gave us the first complete system you could run on a PC, GNU plus Linux. So, unfortunately, having freedom at one point doesn't guarantee you'll keep it. There are over 1,000 different variants of GNU/Linux. They're called distributions. A few of them are entirely free software. Most of them have non-free software added because they're maintained by people who aren't concerned about freedom. They'd rather add convenience at the cost of freedom. So you have to check which is a free distro. To keep your freedom sometimes requires a sacrifice, sometimes a big sacrifice, as at Lexington. Sometimes, but in our campaign, they tend to be little sacrifices. Anybody with a little bit of maturity can make these sacrifices. For instance, you want applications, but some of them are non-free. If you want freedom, you got to do without them. So there may be some inconveniences you have to suffer for your freedom's sake. Then many websites send non-free programs written in JavaScript to the user's browser. If you don't want to run non-free programs, you should install Libre.js, which keeps out non-free JavaScript. And sometimes servers will offer to do your computing. They say, send us all your data, obviously for suckers. Then the server does the computing and sends you back the results. But you're not supposed to think about what's happening because it's a cloud and you don't see what's going on. Well, you should look. It's service as a software substitute, and it takes away control of your computing. So a large fraction of the world's web servers are running GNU/Linux and other free software. But I think the most important computers to put freedom in are your computers, not companies' web servers. They deserve freedom also. But above all, it's people that deserve freedom. So we need to advance. And to do that, we have to cross obstacles. One of them is there are big companies that make a lot of money by having control over users, and they don't want to let us advance. We have to overcome their opposition. Another is that the mainstream media don't talk about free software. They have a term that they use to bury these ethical issues. They say open source instead. Now, it talks about more or less the same programs, but with different ideas, where free software activists say, this is a matter of right and wrong. Users deserve freedom. We demand freedom. The people who say open source, they don't want to say that. So instead they say, let the users change the software and redistribute it, and they'll make the code better. They'll fix some bugs. It may be true, but it's a less important issue. If we want to keep our freedom, we've got to talk about freedom. So say free software, and you're helping us every time. Another obstacle is that lots of schools teach non-free software, which is basically like teaching the kids to smoke tobacco. It's implanting dependence, which is the opposite of what schools should do. A school should prepare citizens to live in a strong, capable, independent, cooperating, and free society, which means teaching free software in the school. But there's another reason to do that for education. Some kids want to become programmers. They're curious. They want to know how the programs work. Well, the one who's studying a free software can understand it. The one who's studying a non-free program can't learn anything because the knowledge in the non-free program is withheld, denied to the students. So to uphold the spirit of education, the school should make sure its programs are free. But there's an even more important reason. Schools should teach the spirit of goodwill, the habit of helping other people. So the class should say, if you bring a program to class, just as if you bring cookies to class, you've got to share it with everyone else. Can't keep it to yourself. You've got to share the source code so other people can learn. So don't bring any proprietary software to this class. The school has to set a good example by following its own rule. It should bring only free software to class, except as a reverse engineering exercise. Another obstacle is there's hardware we don't know how to write free software for because they won't tell us how to use the hardware. That's shocking. They want to sell you the product and they won't tell you how to use it. They say, here's a non-free program you can use, run it and shut up. Don't bother us. Well, how do we find out how to run that hardware? With reverse engineering, you've got to study all those zeros and ones to figure out what they really do and write down how to use that hardware so someone else can write the free program to do it. It's hard work, but it can be done. If you want to make a big technical contribution, that's what you should do. Each new area, activity of life can bring with it new human rights that are necessary. And the human rights depend on each other. If you lose one, it becomes harder to maintain the others. So nowadays, computing is so important in society that the freedoms of free software are among the human rights that society must establish and protect. Thus, how to help? Well, you can write free software. You can organize groups to campaign and persuade schools and governments to move to free software. You can help other people when they have trouble using free software or help them install it. You can say free software and spread the philosophical ideas. Moving to free software is the first step in the liberation of cyberspace, but of course we also use the internet. We need other freedoms there, like network neutrality and putting an end to surveillance of people in general.
So that was when I squeezed it into 14 minutes. For many years, I gave talks with more or less the same images plus additional ones, and I would go through the same material in an hour because I would explain in a lot more detail and more carefully. But what I'm going to do today is figure that gives you the basic idea and go into a specific area, namely free software licenses. Why does a free program have a license? Well, it's the license that makes it free. Under today's rather unfortunate copyright law, everything written is automatically copyrighted. And that includes programs. It's a very bad system. It shouldn't have been done this way. But it wasn't particularly harmful in the age of the printing press because it wasn't easy for ordinary people to copy anything. But now it is. Having everything be copyrighted automatically means automatically you're forbidden to copy it, whatever it is. That's very bad. And it makes every program non-free unless we override it. And the way we override that for a particular program is to put a license on it. And the license says, you can do this, you can do that. Never mind the copyright law says you can't. I'm the author and I say you can. That's what a free software license is for. If the license gives you the 4 essential freedoms, then it's a free software license. That's the definition of a free software license. It's a license that makes the program free by giving every user the 4 essential freedoms. And what are those? I'll repeat them because they're the most important point. Freedom 0 is the freedom to run the program as you wish for any purpose of yours. Freedom 1 is the freedom to study the source code and change it so the program runs the way you wish and does the computing the way you wish. Freedom 2 is the freedom to make exact copies and then give or sell them to others when you wish. And freedom 3 so that you can use it and your freedom is respected by that program. Is this not working? Could people hear me? Do I have to repeat everything I just said? Good. That's a relief. So, what did you say? Oh, thank you. Well, I've had a lot of practice, so I learned to avoid many kinds of mistakes. Not all of them, but many. So anyway, there are different, free software licenses are not all the same. They all give you the 4 freedoms somehow, but there are different ways to do that. That's the difference between various free licenses. But the main difference, the main distinction among free licenses is copyleft or not. You see, some free licenses basically say, do whatever you like with this. And that makes it free. That does give users the 4 freedoms. But it has a drawback. It lets users who want to subjugate others to turn the free program into a non-free program. They could modify the code of that free program, perhaps, add some other stuff, and turn the whole thing into a non-free program. And then the users do get the code that was originally free, but they don't get it with freedom. They get it as a non-free program. They don't get freedom at all. Now, when I started writing software for GNU in 1984, I wanted every user to get freedom, which meant I had to make sure that some greedy jerk could not take my free programs and turn them into non-free programs, perhaps adding some improvements to attract people away from my version. And then those users would be using my program, but they would not get the freedom I wanted to give them. And that would mean failure. Maybe there would be 1 million people using my software, but if they were not getting freedom, it would be a failure in the sense that really mattered. So I came up with a way to stop that, and that's called copyleft. The idea is to put conditions into the license that say basically, yes, you've got the 4 freedoms, but you're not allowed to take away those freedoms from anybody else with this software. So it works through conditions mainly on freedoms 2 and 3 that involve redistributing copies, either exact copies, freedom 2, or modified copies, freedom 3. Copyleft says when you distribute copies of this program, you have to pass it along under the same license, which means that the people who get copies from you have to get the same freedoms. And when they pass it along to others, they have to pass along the same freedoms. So wherever the software goes, the freedoms go with it. That's the idea of copyleft. It's to free the whole world. That's the goal. So copyleft is a general idea. But you can't release a program under a general idea of a license. You have to have a specific text, which is the license of the program. The text I wrote, well, I initially had a version of it for each program. So on GNU Emacs, I put the GNU Emacs General Public License. And then when I had another program like Make, I put it under the GNU Make General Public License. It was basically the same, but a few words were changed. Like one said, this is the license of GNU Emacs, and the other said, this is the license of GNU Make, but it was basically the same thing. Obviously, it was inconvenient that it had to have a few words changed. So in 1989, I figured out a way to use the exact same words. And you could just drop it into any program in order to release that program under this license. And that would make it easy for hundreds or thousands of other developers to release under that license too. They wouldn't have to, in fact, they weren't allowed to alter any word of the license itself. But you didn't have to. You just had to put it into a program, and in the files of the program itself, the source files, you would put a notice, a license notice, which says, this program, such and such, like GNU Emacs, is released under the GNU General Public License, version 1. And it said version 1 or any later version released by the Free Software Foundation, because we had to have an upgrade path. If no one else, if people who release programs this way could never upgrade the license to a new version, well, almost everything made by humans eventually needs changing. There had to be a way to make a GPL version 2 and a GPL version 3 and maybe someday a GPL version 4, because laws change, technology changes, and when the context changes, sometimes you need different rules. So we had to have a way to upgrade the GPL. And here's what I worked out in 1989. Because at that time, the idea of versions of a license meant for upgrades was unheard of. I don't think anyone had ever done that. So what I said was, if you're the author of the program, or more generally the copyright holder, you can say to the users of your program, you, the user, are allowed to redistribute and change this program under the conditions of GNU General Public License version N, or any later version published by the Free Software Foundation. And that way, if that was for version 1, well, someday later the Free Software Foundation might publish a version 2, and the users will be allowed to use that same code under version 2. But they would still be allowed to use it under version 1, because that's what it actually said. You can use this under GNU General Public License version 1 or any later version. So each user would have the choice. So the result of this upgrade method is that the Free Software Foundation cannot take away any freedoms granted already. All it can do is offer a new version with a somewhat different set of rules, and then the users get the choice. So I released version 2 in 1991. And the main change there, I think, was that it took it was able to handle Unix distributions that didn't come with a C library you could link against, because some companies were distributing their proprietary Unix systems without a C library, and separately they would sell the C compiler, and that would come with the C library. So I had to change the GPL to permit compiling and building GNU programs and other GPL-covered programs on those systems using the C library that didn't come with the operating system because it came with a compiler instead. Now, those were non-free operating systems and non-free compilers, but that was all there was. We hadn't finished the GNU system yet. We didn't have a complete free system. So we all had to use these non-free Unix variants to do the development or do anything. And that continued to be the case until after Linux became free. See, Linux was the kernel, was the first free kernel that we could use, but initially it was not free. When Torvalds released Linux for the first time in 1991, it was not free software. Its license was too restrictive. It was in February 1992 that he changed the license, and that's when Linux became free software. As long as it was non-free software, it was no better ethically than any Unix kernel. You know, we had to treat it as non-existent in terms of what we could recommend. But once it became free software, that changed morally. It changed the moral situation completely. And people started working on changing Linux and changing various GNU packages so they would all work together smoothly and easily. And this led to distributions of GNU/Linux. And at that point, eventually we stopped using any of those non-free Unix variants, and we just used GNU plus Linux for our computing. But meanwhile, people did keep running various GNU programs on non-free systems. In fact, there was so much demand to do that, and so many people who wanted to work on that, that there was a danger it would just sort of run away with the whole project and distract developers from the goal of getting rid of the non-free systems. People would say, hey, how about making this change? It will make GNU, whatever it is, work better on Windows. And my response is, we want to get rid of Windows, not enhance it. So everything is supposed to run best on GNU. Of course, developing Windows was such a big sin that Microsoft eventually was compelled to expiate it. Oh well, didn't go over. That joke didn't work. Too bad. So, GPL version 2 worked pretty well, but over the years, various drawbacks showed up, ways in which either laws had changed or technology had changed so that the GPL didn't fit them anymore. For instance, in the late 90s, BitTorrent was invented. And BitTorrent was a very convenient way to distribute large files, such as entire GNU/Linux distributions. But there's a funny thing about it. When you receive a torrent, normally you're also redistributing the torrent. Now, there are particular, what if you're distributing a binary distribution of a free operating system? Well, under the GPL, if you're distributing binaries, you must, in certain approved ways, distribute the source code also. If we didn't have that rule, Freedom 1 would be lost. If someone were permitted to make a version of the system and compile it and distribute just the binaries, that would be non-free software. Binary without source code is non-free software. It is never ethically legitimate. So the goal of the GNU GPL is to make sure that doesn't happen. So it requires, if you're distributing binaries, you must be providing the source code in an acceptable way. And there are a few different acceptable ways. But suppose you thought you were just receiving it. There are no rules about downloading something. The rules only apply to those who distribute. The thing about BitTorrent is if you're downloading it, you're also distributing it. So downloading a torrent of compiled free binaries would violate the GPL. Well, that wasn't intentional. There's nothing wrong with downloading a torrent of free software. We didn't intend to put any requirements on that. But the GPL version 2, which had been written before BitTorrent, had requirements applying to any kind of distribution. Well, this was not good. Anybody should be allowed to download a torrent. So that was something we had to change. And that's one of the things that I changed in GPL version 3, to have a special rule saying, yes, normally when you distribute binaries, you have to make the source available, but there's a special exception when you're just downloading a torrent, so there are no requirements about your distributing the source. Whoever launches the torrent still has to distribute the source. But for all the users downloading it, there's no requirement on them. Well, this was obviously the right thing to do, but the reason we were able to fix it was that we had the upgrade path. Unfortunately, the developers of Linux did not adopt GPL version 3. So what that means is anybody distributing a GNU plus Linux distribution through BitTorrent, a binary compiled one, through BitTorrent, is violating the GPL on Linux. Too bad. Well, I tried. I wish they would advance to GPL version 3. There are various other changes that have been made. I better get out my clock. See, I don't know how long I've been going here, and I don't know when I'm supposed to stop. What? Well, I've got to stop sometime. I've got other work. And you probably want to go eat at some point today and then go to sleep. And at some point, I'd fall asleep. We didn't come here to sleep together, so. So assuming that I started at 2 o'clock, I got quite a bit of time. So, now some of the other changes in GPL version 3 include, we talked with lawyers from a bunch of other countries, and we made sure that the license was designed to work in all the countries we could find out about and not solely based on United States law. And we made sure it would be reasonable if you used it on something that wasn't a piece of software. It should, in principle, work on any kind of document whatsoever. And we put in something to try to stop, to prevent a disgusting hack that is used to make free software effectively impossible to change on a certain computer. It's called TiVoization, and it was used to implement digital restrictions management, DRM, in a product called the TiVo. Now, they were not allowed to add non-free code to Linux. They were distributing Linux in the TiVo. And maybe some pieces of GNU as well, but I'm not sure. But the point is, they wanted to change Linux so that it would decrypt certain files in a secret way and restrict what users could do with them. They were files of video. And so they wanted to change a free program so that it would impose restrictions on users. Well, in general, that's impossible. When the users are free to change the program doesn't, when the users control the program doesn't control them. So what they've worked out a way to do was that they would, they put something in lower levels of the design to restrict the encryption, and then they adapted Linux to work with that. We put something in GPL version 3 so that it says if you're distributing binaries of a GPL 3 covered program, and there are certain installation information, like a signature key, that is needed in order to make it work properly, then you have to give the user everything needed in order to sign per modified versions so that those modified versions would work fully in the hardware. So that if Linux moved to GPL version 3, then TiVo would be required to provide each user with the signature key for per own machine so that the user could modify Linux and recompile it and then sign it and put it into the TiVo, and it would control all the facilities of the hardware. Meaning it couldn't really restrict users with DRM. It couldn't stop users from doing with their hardware whatever they wanted to do. Well, we hoped that Linux would switch to GPL version 3 so that Linux would not become a Trojan horse for imposing DRM on users. But they didn't. Well, it's not our fault. But the overall important thing is we didn't succeed in defeating DRM that way. DRM never completely disappeared, and now there's a threat that it's coming back further. The World Wide Web Consortium gave its blessing to DRM as part of the web standards, and there is a very slowly growing campaign to put DRM in the form of non-free software into web browsers. That's one of the things we change. We don't use Firefox as it's released for several reasons. But one of them is that Firefox contains a program specifically to load other software to do the DRM, non-free software. And we don't want to give our cooperation to DRM even the slightest bit. So our modified version, IceCat, doesn't have that. It's for people who want freedom, and tolerating DRM means you lose your freedom. Now, I have never played a Blu-ray disc in my life, because Blu-ray discs all implement DRM. I've heard that there's no way to write a Blu-ray disc which doesn't have DRM. You know, with a DVD, you can write a DVD that doesn't have DRM in it if you want to. But I believe with Blu-ray discs, there's no way to protect yourself from the evil Blu-ray. So, except don't use Blu-ray discs, and that's my solution. I hate DRM so much. No matter what the movie is, I'd rather not see it than surrender to DRM. I have the strength to refuse to see any movie or every movie if that's what it takes. Anyway, we also put something in GPL version 3 to reduce some of the dangers of patented computational ideas. You know, it's a bad thing for patent systems to permit patenting of computational ideas. And part of the reason is that this means that any software package can infringe patents. And a large software package probably infringes thousands of patents, and there's no way to find out what they are. Practically speaking, there's no way you could look through the database of all patents and try to find which ones might cover something in your program. Because there are many different ways of describing the same computation, and they use different words. If you try to do a search for keywords, you couldn't expect to find them all. It's just not possible. And besides, there's so many, once you find a patent, how do you know whether that applies to something in your program? It's very hard to figure out what the patent actually means. In fact, you'd probably have to pay a lawyer to spend hours or maybe weeks helping you figure out what that patent actually covers. And you can't afford that. And even at the end, the answer might not be really certain. So allowing patents to apply to software is a recipe for, at first, legal chaos, but then the chaos gets resolved in a simple way. The big companies all have lots of patents, and they cross-license with each other, so they're safe and everybody else is in danger. And so, like so many other things in politics, it turns into a scheme that keeps the big companies powerful and helps them keep down the competition and anybody independently doing anything. So it's limited to what extent a license like the GPL can try to stop this. After all, we can't make patent law go away. We can't exempt our work from patent law with our own license. It just can't be done. What we could do was say, if a company contributes to a program and then distributes it, then it's granting a license, at least for its own patents, to those who use it and redistribute it later, the downstream users. And just redistributing it, there are certain patent requirements in that, so that at least it protects people in some circumstances. And there are various other smaller improvements as well. So these are reasons why you should switch to GPL version 3. You can find more information about these topics and lots of other licensing topics in GNU.org/licenses. First of all, you'll find licenselist.html, in which we list lots of licenses and we say which ones are free. And we also say for the free ones what their advantages or disadvantages are and whether there are situations where we think they're good to use. That is, put them on your own work. And specifically for the question of how to license your own work, we have license-recommendations.html, which describes various circumstances and what we would recommend in the way of licenses for those circumstances. So please take a look there. There's also a complete list of the improvements in GPL version 3 and various other useful articles about following and choosing and applying licenses. Now, copyleft can be thought of in two different ways. On the one hand, in terms of why I chose to use copyleft, why I chose to develop copyleft, and what its purpose is, what it's meant to achieve. Well, on the one hand, it's meant to facilitate and encourage making more free software. Because if you want to make a free program, you can use my code in it. I want you to be able to use my code in your free programs. I do not want you to be allowed to use my code in a non-free program. And part of the purpose is to encourage people to make their programs free rather than non-free. I want all software to be free. I want there to be lots of free software around, and I'd prefer if non-free software did not get developed at all. So my influence over that is limited, but to the extent that my code is useful, I've made it clear how you are allowed to use it. You can use it in free software if your software is under the GPL. You cannot use it in non-free software at all. But there's also another emotional way of seeing it, which is if someone wants to be a jerk and take my code and put it into a non-free modified version, that makes me angry. That's taking advantage of my code to mistreat people with it. I don't want that to happen. I'd rather be able to stop them. So, and there are other people who say, well, sometimes I'm willing to work on non-free software, but when I do, I want to get paid. Why should I let you use my code in your non-free program and not even pay me? You can look at it whichever way you wish. From my point of view, the last one is the least important, because I wouldn't let you use my code in your non-free program even if you offered to pay me, because what I want is the freedom more than money. But people who but there are people with views closer to open source who like using the GPL because that way at least they'll get paid when they contribute to somebody's non-free program. So we have this spectrum of views in our community. There are the people with open source views who think it's good to develop technology. They'd actually rather have a non-free program than no program. And then there are free software campaigners like me, and the only programs that really exist as far as we're concerned are the free ones. A non-free program is a program you had better not use, so it might as well not exist. And the result of this, since almost everybody starts out with society's usual idea that a program is good if it's convenient, constantly they find free software views strange and surprising. And it's necessary to explain them over and over, that we're not judging by the same criteria they're accustomed to, the ones they will find always taken for granted in the media, that a program is good if it's convenient. We say no, a program is good if it is convenient and respects your freedom. And if it doesn't respect your freedom, it's not safe. And the reason it's not safe is at the deeper level because you're not going to control it. You're going to pay for it with your freedom. But at a more practical, immediate level, the reason it's not safe is because it's almost certainly malware. Now, in the video, I showed you some examples. I know lots more. Examples of non-free software that is actually malware. It has functionalities designed to mistreat the users. In fact, it's almost always true. Somebody did a study of, I think it was 1,000 or more most popular Android apps. And there is one particular kind of surveillance that the investigators could check for without seeing the source code of the app. They could externally detect that kind of surveillance. And they found that for the paid apps, 60% were doing that kind of surveillance. And for the gratis apps, note I do not say free, they're not free software, but they were gratis, zero price. Well, 90% were doing that kind of surveillance. And that's just one kind of surveillance. You know, you can program surveillance in lots of ways that nobody can detect out externally. So maybe they're all snooping, but the investigators could only show that most of them were snooping. So when I say that non-free software is usually malware, there's a basis for that. And there are many nasty kinds of things that they can do. In addition to snooping and restricting users with DRM and backdoors, another common thing is tethering a product to a server. There are products you can buy as part of the Internet of Mal things, where the only way to give commands to the thing you bought is to go through a particular server. You, through your personal tracking and surveillance device, send a command to that server, and the server sends it to the product that's in your home, and then the response goes back through the same path. So the server is watching all your commands and all the responses. It knows everything that you do with the device. That's as long as the server keeps running. But this is the other nasty aspect of a tethered device. If the manufacturer decides that that product is no longer selling very well and it doesn't care about that product anymore, it can save money by switching off the server. And then you'll find that you can no longer send a command to the product you bought. Maybe it's 3 years old and the manufacturer has decided that that's too old and it doesn't matter anymore. So it just cuts everybody off. All those products stop working. Well, they maybe work to a limited extent if you can push buttons on the device. But often you can't do everything by pushing buttons. The only way to do some things is to go through that server that doesn't run anymore. You're basically asking for that if you buy those. And then sometimes they make the products artificially addictive. Or there are a lot of things. Look at GNU.org/malware, and you will see lists of hundreds of examples categorized according to type of malicious functionality and type of product or company that did it. So this is something that wasn't the case 30 years ago, maybe not much even 20 years ago. Things have gotten qualitatively worse in that it's not just potentially the case that a non-free program would stop you from doing what you want to do. They're now designed from the very beginning to mistreat users. That's their purpose. If you allow them into your life, you're making a fundamental mistake, and you're going to suffer for it. I believe we need laws prohibiting the collection of personal information. We need to have digital payment systems implemented with free software that allow anonymous payment. Fortunately, the software already works. It's called GNU Taler, T-A-L-E-R. Look at taler.net. Now we just need to get it interfaced to banking systems and approved and put into use, so we can have systems where you could pay digitally, but no one knows who you were. In the meantime, when I buy something, I pay cash. It's that simple. I always carry some cash, but if I needed more, I would go to a bank machine and get out some cash. Note the difference, the practical difference between getting out cash from a bank and paying cash versus paying with any kind of digital payment system. If you get the cash out, well, the bank knows where you were when you got cash out of your account. But it doesn't know where you spent it, doesn't know what you bought. Whereas if you use today's digital payment systems, various companies know that it was you, what you bought, and where. That's more surveillance. And that's why I refuse to use those systems. And you can teach yourself, once again, to resist surveillance of what you do in your life.
How about cryptocurrency?
How about what?
Cryptocurrency.
Well, in theory, they might be okay, but for the most part, they're not really anonymous for the payer. Another problem is on the other side, which is that they're very convenient for laundering money, very convenient for hiding profits, and thus evading taxes. Now, tax evasion or avoidance, that's just a question of whether it's illegal or not. That's a side issue. The point is, rich people take a lot of money outside of taxation. Lots of rich people's income is not being taxed, and as a result, governments are impoverished, and that means they can't do what we need them to do. We need to have a state because there are many jobs that can only be done by a state, but in order to do them, it needs money. And well, one of the ways it gets that money is from taxes, and we've got to make sure that rich people pay taxes. And that's a big fight. a big political fight and also legal fight. There's a campaign that makes slow progress against the tax havens that invite rich people to park their money there and pay no taxes and help them hide the fact that they're doing so, because they might get in trouble at home if it were found out what they're doing. So GNU Taler can't be used for that because the store has to identify its payments. The purchaser is anonymous. The store is not. So, by the way, at what time should I stop? Half hour. Okay, it's almost time for me to start questions. I need the transparent plastic bag. Where is the transparent plastic bag that was brought in with me? Okay. I'm going to answer a few questions I received by email this morning. Okay. So it will only take me a few minutes to answer them, and I think that this is a good time to do that. Hello. Where's... What? I'm looking for the message. Where? Oh boy. This is unfortunate. I can't find that message. I don't know where it is. Too bad. So now I'm going to present my other identity. Oh, what do you know? Here's the other one. Didn't understand why it wasn't in there. Stop. Please. I know you're trying to help, but wait till I ask. I am Saint Ignatius of the Church of Emacs. I bless your computer, my child. Emacs started out as a text editor that became a way of life for many users, and then eventually a church. So And so we have some rituals, at least in theory, and we also have saints. That's why I'm Saint Ignatius. Now, to be a member of the Church of Emacs, you must recite the Confession of the Faith. You must say, there is no system but GNU, and Linux is one of its kernels. Then, if you become a true expert, you can become a saint. To be a saint in the Church of Emacs, you must not run anything, any non-free software in and on your system. And the way you formally establish your membership in the church is through a ceremony called the Bar Mitzvah. In which you recite a portion of our sacred scriptures, that is to say, the system source code. So we have rejected the priesthood of technology. Everyone is free to read our sacred scriptures. Now, it's been a long time since I've presented St. Ignatius. We also have the cult of the Virgin of Emacs, which refers to anyone who has never known or used Emacs. And offering someone the chance to lose Emacs virginity, which you can do by teaching per how to use Emacs, is a blessed act, according to the Church of Emacs. There is also a breakaway sect. There's a Tibetan variant of the Church of Emacs, which believes in reciting the Confession of the Faith automatically over and over again with a script. But the Mother Church holds that in order for this to have spiritual value, you have to say it yourself with your voice. So, I guess that's all I remember of this. Obviously, I'm going to have to watch it. This is the first speech I've given in person since 2019. I will answer questions in just a moment, but I want to try to find I know it's in my mailbox, but it's that was, that's pretty big, unfortunately. Here it is. So I was mailed a few questions. Let's see. What do I think of the worldwide organization of hackerspaces? Unfortunately, I don't know how they are organized, so I know nothing about that. What do I think about the fact that hackers and programmers are creating their communities in every city around the world? I think that would be great if they had a firm idea of free software and made sure that their communities that they're creating uphold free software and freedom. And I always eagerly look for opportunities to try to spread that idea to the maker community. What role should hackerspaces play now and in the future, in your opinion? Well, basically, they should say, if you're working on a project that is meant to be released in some way to the public or put into systematic use, we insist that to use our facilities, you have to make it free. You've got to be treating the community right, and then we'll cooperate with you. So now I'd like to take questions. Did people give out pieces of paper? Did you give out pieces of paper to people? Oh, well, that was an unfortunate thing. I'd really appreciate it if you would do it now. Yeah, what? Do you have? I don't understand. I have hearing problems, and so I figure handing in questions on paper will enable me to read them. Is anyone handing out pieces of paper? Hello? Organizers, are you here? Wake up. You can give out a bunch at each end and people will pass them across. That's fast. Okay, well, write your question on it and give it to me.
Okay.
Just put it down. Put it down. Thank you. Why is Linux still under GPL version 2? I can't speak for Torvalds. You'd have to ask him that. Have you ever been using any smartphone? Well, I have occasionally used somebody else's portable phone. I'd say, hey, could you lend me your phone? And I'd make a call. A few times I've sent a text message, but I don't have one. And there are two levels of reasons for that. One is It's a computer filled with non-free software. I don't want to have a computer with non-free software. Not if it's going to have software changed, and it is going to have software changed. Then at the more practical level, every portable phone sends out signals saying, here I am. And the phone network recognizes where it is and records that and keeps those records for months or years. And I don't like that kind of surveillance. Also, in the software of basically every portable phone, there is a universal backdoor. The software can be replaced remotely. Specifically, it's the software in a smartphone, it's the modem processor that has the universal backdoor. Now, there are a few models that have been designed to stop this, but they're unusual, and almost all portable phones you will find have the universal backdoor, and that can be used to convert them into listening devices that listen all the time and transmit all the conversation they hear. So this is an Orwellian device, and my response to it is much stronger than no thanks. It's, what do you take me for? So I use them occasionally, but I won't have one. So, will GNU Church conflict with Rust cult? I know about the language Rust, but I don't know what the Rust cult is, unfortunately. So, well, I mean, I know that Rust is a programming language, but he said the Rust cult, and I don't know what that means. Do I like something the crab? I don't know what that is. Sorry. It asks, what Linux distribution is on your machine? It's not a Linux distribution. That term is a misnomer. They are GNU plus Linux distributions. And I implore you, please don't call them Linux distributions, because if you do, you're talking about our work and giving us none of the credit. And that is not only unfair, but it's bad for our work in the future. Please recognize us when you talk about the GNU system. Anyway, the GNU plus Linux distribution I run is called Treescale, and it's one of the entirely free distributions, the ones that contain no, could you pick all those up? Yeah, it's one of those that contain no non-free software. One of the ones we can recommend to others. If you look at gnu.org/distros, you'll see what we say about various distributions. How can hackerspaces help develop the free software community? Mainly by adopting principles about freedom, so that when so that the products they do and their own communications with the community teach the importance of freedom. If machine learning tool is used to train a system on several, he says open source. I don't advocate open source. Projects with different licenses, which would apply to tools' output code. That's a misunderstanding. Machine learning systems produce trained neural nets. That's not code. It doesn't really have an author. And in any case, the training examples are not being copied. They're being thought about, but not copied. As far as I know, it doesn't matter what they are. It has nothing to do with copyright. And if any of them are programs, again, the output of those programs is not covered by the copyright on the program itself. That's a general principle of copyright law. If you write a program and it generates some output, someone else runs it to generate some output, that output in general is not a derivative work of the program code. So the author of the program and any license on it, that has nothing to do with that output or who has the copyright on it, if anyone, or whether it can be used. Please tell about political obstacles on your way of a free software evangelist. Well, I don't think I've found a lot of, well, it's such a broad question. Unfortunately, it doesn't bring anything to mind specific. I wish I could see how to say something relevant. What about the Vine users? I'm not sure what Vine is. Is that a variant of VI? What? Windows what?
It's a program used to run Windows programs on GNU.
Oh, is Vine free software?
Yeah.
Well, okay, there's nothing wrong there. Then the next question is, what program are you emulating? Oh, well, then that's bad. See? But I wouldn't blame Vine for that. Those programs are unjust, and they're equally unjust if you run them on Vine or if you run them on Windows or anything else. A non-free program that you are using takes away your freedom. You hold on for a moment. I have a large buffer here, and the light here is very bad for reading anything. It's all coming at me like this, and it bounces off the paper in a funny way with shadows. What about the herd? The herd contains some code. The herd is a bunch of server programs, and they come from different places. Some of them were developed by the Free Software Foundation. Some of them contain code copied from Linux, like file systems. So they actually have different licenses. And since they're separate programs, they can have different licenses. They're not actually linked together or combined. They communicate by message passing. This was the idea of the GNU herd. You'd have lots of servers doing various jobs, communicating by message passing, and this way they would be separate programs as far as copyright is concerned and also as far as execution is concerned. Well, what CPU do you consider the most open nowadays? Well, I don't judge things in terms of open. I'm not an advocate of open. I'm an advocate of freedom. So the question is, which CPUs respect freedom the most? And unfortunately, they're all going the way of injustice. The main CPUs these days have malicious backdoor modules, such as Intel's management engine, and AMD has something like that, and Apple's machines processor has something like that. And I use an old ThinkPad which doesn't have that. Well, it has an early version which we can turn off totally, so it's safe. Now, I think that there should be laws against that. Can I predict the next challenge to free software? No. There's so many challenges already in existence and getting worse that our hands are totally full trying to do anything about them. Tolerant and oppressive governments, the payment system open to government, even one direction just kills small business in Ukraine. I don't understand, unfortunately. I'm not sure which payment system that whoever wrote that is referring to. Maybe someone can explain it. Oh, this laptop was made in something like 2008. Do I steal coding? What would that mean? You mean plagiarize? No. What does that mean? Do I still program? Not much. Occasionally I do, but that's not most of my work. What do you think of the right to repair movement? I support it, but I think it doesn't go far enough. The right to repair movement is basically like the beginning of understanding that the software and products should be free. They're complaining about some of the consequences of non-free software in their products that they buy, and noticing how that non-free software is used to prevent users from helping themselves, prevent users from fixing things, and basically to subjugate users. Well, yes, that's what non-free software does. It subjugates users. So, of course, you should be free to understand the software so that you can fix the device. The software should be free, and then you would be free to fix the device. Do you accept the idea of information as a commodity that can be sold and bought? I don't think that information should exist. It shouldn't be collected. A database of personal information, once built, will be misused. Therefore, instead of the misguided idea of data protection laws, we need privacy laws that insist that systems will treat people as anonymous and not try to identify them and not keep data about people, not even accumulate the data in the first place. If there's no database with personal data, there's no danger. Whereas once the database is accumulated, it can be misused in so many ways. Of course, the organization that collected the data can misuse the data. And data protection laws try to limit that somewhat. But in addition, there could be a security error and the organization leaks the data to others that will surely misuse it and won't care about those laws. Or a cracker could break into the system and get the data and provide it to those who will misuse it. Rogue employees in the company, the organization that collected the data, could misuse it. They have done so. And finally, the government can collect that personal data and use it for repression. And that has happened too. So the way to be safe is design systems that don't identify people, that don't collect data about people. For instance, paying in cash. Paying in cash doesn't determine who's paying. There are a lot of questions for you, and I can't pick most. Could you just, well, I'll think about autographs later. Right now I'm thinking about questions. So it's about something I have no idea. Secret experiments, LAM. I have no idea what that refers to, sorry. Something I've never heard of. What is your opinion on practice of dual licensing? Well, there's a confusion about that term. Dual licensing means you take a program and you say, you can use this under this license or that license. And as long as one of the two licenses is free, the program is free. Because that one license gives you the 4 freedoms for using the code. And what the other one says doesn't matter to this. But the classical case of dual licensing was Perl in the old days. It was released under the artistic license disjunction with the GPL, so you could use either one. Now, maybe the artistic license was intended to be free, but some parts of it were not clearly written, so we couldn't be sure. However, we knew that the GPL was free, and therefore Perl was free. But sometimes people use the term dual license in a misleading way. What they're really talking about is selling exceptions. Here's how that works. A developer releases a program under the GNU GPL. And then, and by the way, the GNU GPL says that others are not allowed to put that code into a non-free program. But the developer says, if you want to put this code into a non-free program, pay me and I will give you a special exception that permits you to do it. And that's perfectly legitimate because this code is available to the public as free software. Now, some people object to the idea of offering these exceptions, but I compare that with release under a weak pushover license like one of the 2 BSD licenses or the Apache license, all those licenses that say you can do almost whatever you like with the code. And if the developer released that same code under a weak license, then everybody would get that exception. And we don't condemn that. That's free software. It's not copylefted, but it is free. So if letting everybody put that code into non-free programs is acceptable, then letting just some who paid put the code into non-free programs, well, that's less of a bad thing. So it's acceptable too. You stick it into here? Well, I'll do it. It's starting to just get to be cumbersome with so many questions. What should we do if we need to use proprietary JavaScript to register to a meeting with you? Was that the case? I hope not. That's bad. Complain vociferously and say, I want to register, but I can't use your website because it tried to send non-free JavaScript code to my machine. How can I register without going through this? Even better, say, please let me pay cash at the door. You don't need to know who I am. After all, what am I going to do? I'm going to go to an event where the public is invited. You don't need to know my name. And the event shouldn't know people's names. There's too much habitual demanding people identify themselves. And that is dangerous in itself. It gets people accustomed to being asked all the time who they are, so that they then start answering instead of saying, who the hell are you to want to know? How did you find energy to fight the proprietary world for so long? You see, to me, there's nothing more invigorating than this. It's exciting. Showing people something that's important that they hadn't seen is exciting. And when people get it, when they understand, that's exciting. And when people start to help, that's exciting. You'll find it exciting too. Well, this is trying to compare owning software and owning hardware. I should point out that with free software, owning free software is normal. If you get a copy of a free program, you own that copy. And that's the way it should be. Whereas the proprietary developers, they say, you're not allowed to own a copy. All of your software belong to us, is what a proprietary software developer says. So if you want to own a copy of software, it needs to be free software. And likewise, if you buy a piece of hardware like a computer or a microphone or a stand or a chair, you should own that too. And proprietary software stops that. By putting proprietary software into the physical product, they say you can't own it. And this is what the right to repair supporters have noticed. It's an injustice. The things that you have, you should really own them. What if the FSF will be hacked and GPL4 will be released and it will be anti-copyleft? Well, it's very unlikely. And it probably wouldn't even be legally valid anyway. You know, if somebody fraudulently pretended that the Free Software Foundation had done something, I don't think courts would consider that legitimate. They would say, no, the Free Software Foundation didn't really do this.
Sorry, you misunderstood my question.
I guess I don't.
I meant hijack. I meant
Oh.
if the chair members of FSF will become some pro-government people, what happened? What will happen?
We are working on how to make that even harder, because we want to show everyone that you can have confidence in GNU licenses.
I've asked that question because recently some people wanted you to leave Free Software Foundation. They didn't want to.
I know, but first of all, I'm back on the board now, and second, the rest of the people on the board are supporters of copyleft also. And third, I ask you to join the Free Software Foundation as an associate member, and also tell the organization that you want to express your support for me. This is help that the Free Software Foundation needs, together with something that will help me too. What social network should I use? I don't use any of them. I communicate with email, and I post things on various websites, like the GNU website and my own personal website.
Do you run your own SFTP server?
My own what server? I can't hear you. No, the Free Software Foundation system administrators run it.
What web browser do you use? Web browser?
Oh, I usually use IceCat. IceCat is our modified Firefox with some freedom flaws corrected and some surveillance features removed. And which messenger? I don't use any. It's inconvenient for me to have to do things in a way that requires a net connection. Email is convenient for me because I can do lots of work on my mail when I have no net connection and send it out later, because it's not designed to be instant. Do I see any need to update the GPL to version 4 now? No. I found one thing that I would definitely change if and when there's a version 4, but it's not important enough to require a version 4 now. So we'll go on with version 3.
What is that thing?
What is what?
What is that thing?
I don't remember. I saved it in a file so that if I need to know it, I'll find it. Well, gee, I'm touched. Just a compliment. Thanks. Someone is thanking me. If you want to thank me or the GNU project, please help. That's the way to show your thanks. Join in and help. We need a lot of work to do more in the GNU project. We need programming work, and we also need various kinds of administrative work. You know, the GNU project, like any other activity involving multiple people, needs organizing. It needs administration. It's all volunteers, but still it's needed. You can join in helping in either way. Take a look at gnu.org/help, and you'll see many different kinds of work we need, and if you volunteer for any of them, that will be important. For instance, we need people we need more webmasters right now. If you are good at writing HTML and you understand the issues of HTML in a website with no JavaScript, well, also, it has CSS, but it has no JavaScript. If you're fairly comfortable with that, please volunteer to be a GNU webmaster. We need your help. Who is going to lead when someday I'm dead? Well, it's going to happen someday, I suppose, right? And actually, we're working on redesigning how the FSF will select its board to give us a chance to judge people better based on more knowledge about them. So, but can't say any more about that until it's decided. what recent developments are there from me in the FSF? Well, one thing that we've done is we've recognized the full injustice of non-free software, and we now publicize that. The idea that non-free software is probably malware too. The idea that when people talk about security, they're missing half the point. You'll see in almost any discussion about computer security, they're limiting it to security against outsiders, third parties. They don't talk about security against the software developer, and that's because the only way to have any security against the software developer is with free software that gives others the chance to check it and fix it. With non-free software, there's never any security against the developer of the software. You know, Microsoft can show the bugs to the US NSA, so the NSA can break the security of computers with Windows all around the world. And, you know, it's only Microsoft that we've seen a report is doing that, but other companies could be doing the same thing. And if it's a Chinese company, well, maybe it's doing that for the government of China. If it's a Russian company, maybe it's doing that for Putin. How do you know? You basically can't trust the developer of a non-free program at all for anything. What do you do about people who carry devices that could be listening to them and to you? Well, we can start the custom of saying, here is a sound insulating metal box. Please put your personal tracking and listening device into this box and I'll close it and you can take it out when you leave. When I usually, when I travel, stay at somebody's home, but I've started paying attention to whether they have things like Alexa devices. I don't want that. I don't want it to listen to me. I don't trust it. Duplicate. How do we make a profit with software under GPL v3? Well, selling exceptions is one way, and selling support, service, things like that, training, is another way. But the main way, the way that's easy, totally easy, is develop solutions for specific clients and deliver those solutions to the client under a free license. But the client's going to have to pay to get it written. That's something that people won't do as volunteers. So it's basically no different with free software. That business is no different with free software from what it is normally, except that you respect the client by handing over the results that the client has paid for in a way that respects the client's freedom. My understanding is that that's most of the software business. I don't have any reference to cite. I know that there was a reference about this at some time in the past, that most paid software development was custom software, not general purpose software. So that's probably still true, which means there's lots of opportunities to do this business and treat clients with respect. How does the GPL license deal with libraries? Does using a GPL-covered library in another program require the program to be GPL licensed as well? Yes and no. Basically, it doesn't require the other program to be licensed specifically under the GPL, but it has to be under a compatible license so that the combination can be under the GPL. So for instance, suppose the other program is released under the Apache license, Apache version 2. Well, that's compatible with GPL version 3, so you can put the two together in a combination. And the license that covers both will be GPL version 3. But if you took that other program away separately, that would still say, I am covered by the Apache license version 2. What do I think about the lesser GPL? Well, that's a compromise. I decided to make that compromise because I wanted it to be possible to link non-free programs with the GNU C library. Well, I'm against non-free programs. I think they're evil. So why did I make that compromise? Simple. I decide if you can't link non-free programs with the C library, you can't run them on the system at all. So the question was, once we had the whole GNU system out there, would people be allowed to compile non-free programs for it, and which requires linking them with the C library? And I concluded that if we didn't allow that, it would be self-defeating. That people would say, this system's no good, we don't want it. So I concluded that we had to accept that compromise, and I concluded it was morally legitimate to do so because we would not be distributing any non-free software. Originally, I called it the library GPL, the GNU library GPL, but that gave people a wrong impression. They thought if I'm writing a library, I should put it under the LGPL. Well, not necessarily. Sometimes it's better to release a library under the GPL so that it can only be used in free programs. It's a tactical question. I use an old ThinkPad laptop which can be reflashed with LibreBoot. Oh, great. Any recommendations on modern computers where I can do the same? Unfortunately, no. The modern CPUs are all evil. Now, Purism is planning to sell machines where they allow the management engine to run until startup, and then people found a way to turn it off from then on. Is that good enough? I don't know. I don't have an opinion about that question. I'm not an expert on the management engine or how it's connected to things or anything about it. Basically, what are free web browsers? Well, IceCat is the one we recommend. What do I think about companies that are investing in what they call, quote, open source, unquote, but sometimes is free software? Well, at one level, it's good. Developing useful free software is a good thing. I'm not going to say that that's bad. On the other hand, sometimes what they spend their money on is developing non-copylefted alternatives to successful copylefted free programs. And that feels like weakening our community's defenses. My opinion about Red Hat. Well, for the most part, Red Hat does work on extending some GNU programs, and I think that's useful. What do I think about CentOS? I recall that CentOS was not a free distribution, but I don't remember any more details than that. I don't know what the non-free software is. What's the best reasons to become a free software developer? The best reason is because you want freedom and you're disgusted with running non-free software and you want to replace that non-free software, write free replacements to free everyone, including yourself. That's the best reason. So there are GNU plus Linux distros whose developers call them Linux something or other. For instance, there's a GNU/Linux distribution whose developers call it Linux Mint, but that's a misnomer. It's a variant of the GNU/Linux system, so the right name for it is GNU/Linux Mint. You know, just because they got it wrong doesn't mean we have to honor their mistake. Comparing reverse engineering with free hardware designs. Well, I'm in favor of both, but I think that reverse engineering is much easier. For instance, to reverse engineer the specs to control a peripheral is a lot easier than designing and manufacturing another peripheral. That's tremendously hard, and it takes a lot of money to mass produce hardware. Whereas once it doesn't cost you a lot of money to reverse engineer the specifications, how you run the hardware. And once that's done, you can write free software and you don't have to make and manufacture alternate hardware. So in the long term, free hardware designs are best, but that is a tremendously slow and expensive way. So let's do the reverse engineering, please. Very important. Now, he says, a lot of hardware nowadays is not free. I'm not sure what it means to say that a piece of hardware is free or not. The definition I've got for free software is precise and specific. What does it mean to say that a computer is free? Is this clock free? I don't know what it would mean. So after thinking about this for a while, I decided it's a mistake to formulate a question like that. It's not hardware that can be free or non-free, it's a hardware design. A hardware design is a lot more like a program. It's not a physical object, it's a work of authorship, and so it could be copyrighted, and it could be under a free license. You see, now these two things are similar enough that you can carry the concept of free from one to the other. Take a look at gnu.org/philosophy/free hardware designs, which says basically everything I have to say about free in the area of hardware. He's asking me which programming language is more free. The question actually is not meaningful. A language isn't free or non-free. Like, for instance, what about the C language? Is the C language free? What does that mean? The meaningful question is, can you compile and run C programs with free software? Now, in 1985, the answer was no. There was no way to compile and run a C program except with a proprietary compiler. And that's why I wrote a free C compiler, because I wanted to change that. I wanted to make it possible to run C programs with only free software. And I wrote the programs needed to make that possible. And so it was possible. In 1990, it was possible. It was the same language, though. In 1985, you could only run C programs with a proprietary compiler. In 1990, you could run them with a free compiler. So the point is, it doesn't make sense to ask, is the C language free? What the question that makes sense is, what about this compiler? Is this free? What about that compiler? Is that free? That's the question that is meaningful to answer, and also the question that is important because it shows you what work needs to be done. I can't hear you at all. I'm sorry. I have hearing problems. I don't know what you said. If you write it down, I'll be able to read it. Oh, I called for laws against data collection. The GDPR is not enough because it's mainly focused on data protection. It doesn't try very hard to stop collection of data. Let me give you an example. In some cities in Europe, there are parking lots where the way you pay is by entering the license number of the car in the system, and then it charges you money somehow. But this is a surveillance system. It means they know exactly which cars have been parked everywhere at any time. That should be illegal. It should be illegal to set up a system like that for the simple reason that there are ways to collect money for parking without identifying every car. Therefore, it should be illegal to do it by identifying every car. That's what it means to prohibit all avoidable collection of identifying information. Allow people to do things anonymously. Someone's asking about his fundamental right to sell programs and how that relates to open source principles. There are no open source principles. The whole point of open source was not to have principles, not to make it a matter of principle, because the free software movement is based on specific principles. And the whole point of open source was not to talk about those principles, to forget about that, to present it as a matter of practical advantages only. Now, I like the practical advantages too. I'm not saying forget about all practical advantages, but I am saying most important is the principle of users' freedom in their use of programs. Now, the other thing it mentions is sell programs, but that's ambiguous. You know, with free software, you can sell copies. That's selling software, but not in the way proprietary companies do it. So you've got to be careful about terminology. The free software movement accepts and doesn't object to selling copies of programs as long as they come with freedom. But if they don't come with freedom, then they're non-free software, and that's an injustice. And if you're wise, you won't buy. And there's a fundamental fallacy in the argument that some people try to make about, well, we need to be able to get money in order to pay for development of software. Why? Is development of software a good thing? Do we want software to be developed? that argument assumes, yes, of course, developing software is a good thing. I don't agree. I think that developing software is a good thing if the software is free, and it's a bad thing if the software is not free. So to assume some simple statement like developing software is good, that's too simplistic. I don't agree with that. There has to be a condition on it. Developing free software is good, developing proprietary software is bad. Now, the argument won't go through starting from that starting point. So that's the place where the fallacy is usually introduced. What is your personal attitude to the modern service-based app model? Well, I wouldn't use any of those disservices because they deny the user control over the computing. In order for free software to give you control over your computing, you need to be running your own copy. And so if the copy that's doing your computing belongs to some service company and is running in that company's computers, and you can't even see the source of that, and if they showed you source, you wouldn't be sure that that source matches what's actually running in their computer. You can't trust that. Now, I don't mind using the web to communicate with an organization. Just as I can communicate with an organization by talking with a clerk on the phone. Okay, well, if I do the same thing with a web browser, that's okay too. But it's only okay if it's limited to communication. If they start trying to do my computing for me, that's not right. And if they send non-free software to run in my browser, of course, that's unacceptable. So it has to be kept to a matter of communication, just as if you were talking over the phone with a representative of the company. You say what you want, the representative says what it costs, you say yes or no, a deal is made, but they don't get any other power over you. What do I think about video games? Well, I think they can be fun, but I wouldn't use a non-free one. What do you think about the, quote, MIT license, unquote? That term is misleading. There are actually two different licenses that people are referring to. One is the X11 license, and the other is the expat license. They're pretty similar. Both of them are free licenses. They are non-copyleft, weak pushover licenses. Look at licenselist.html for all questions like that. The camera in the middle of the room running by a non-free driver, like at your coffee machine or other home device, those shouldn't have cameras. You should put tape over their cameras so that they can't see you. But basically, I wouldn't want to have a coffee maker. Even if I liked coffee, I wouldn't allow a coffee maker that was talking over the internet to somebody else. That's unacceptable. Any product I buy for my home is not going to talk on the internet to anyone. It can only talk to my computer through a secure interface so that it's basically an appliance, not a computer. So that nothing can change any software in it, which means the software might as well be a chip as far as freedom and security are concerned. what is an ideal future? Well, there are many political issues in life, but I assume we're talking about in regard to software. It would be, well, all software should be free, meaning every user of the software gets the for free. Could you pick all those up? But other than that, as far as technical things are concerned, basically, that's a matter of taste. I don't have strong opinions about what you should like in the software you run. Have you heard about Serenity OS? I don't recall if I ever heard of it. How do you see the future of free software? Well, I used to say that I couldn't see the future. My crystal ball was full of clouds. But then people started talking about the cloud. Well, that's nonsense. The only cloud is in the mind of users that think that there's a cloud. There is no cloud, only various companies' computers. And they do things with them that you don't know and you can't tell, and you shouldn't trust your computing to them. Could I take a photo with you? Not under these circumstances, I'm sorry. Ordinarily I would, but I don't want to have a lot of people coming around me. It's not safe. Sorry. I wish I could. What do you think about Facebook and other companies providing user personal data to government agencies? They shouldn't be collecting that data. The root of these problems is not when the data is used, it's when the data is collected. And if we focus on that, we will see what would be a real solution. Focusing on trying to limit the way the data gets used tends to be ineffective. It's very hard to stop the data from being misused, especially when governments are involved. They keep finding hidden ways to pressure those that collect the data to hand it over secretly. But if it's illegal to have a system that can get the data from you at all, it's easier to verify that law is not being violated. Is the FSF planning to run a system of certifications? No, it's a giant job, and we don't have resources for that. In principle, it would be fine, but we're not in a position to do it. Should your user scripts plugins also be free? Well, yes, but I've never said that you have an obligation to distribute copies of a program if you just want to run it yourself. A program that you write and you use is free, because every user has the 4 freedoms. Look at all the users. There's you. You're the only user, and you have the 4 freedoms because you wrote it. So it is free software in a trivial way. And you're free to release copies if you wish, but you're not obligated to. So writing a program and using it yourself, I think, is fine. You don't have to release it. If it's really useful, it might be a really good thing. I might join people in saying, hey, please finish this up and release it, because it would be a good contribution to the community. But I wouldn't say, you have no right to keep this private. How can you assess the current state of free software? I can't systematically do that. I wouldn't know how. I just hear some things, and that's all I can go by. Thank you. Thank you. Nowadays, people speak about danger of System D. I don't have a strong opinion about that, mainly because it is free software. Which version of Office software do you use? I use LibreOffice, but I don't use it very often. I prefer to do my editing in Emacs. Is it ethical to ever run proprietary software as a demo of the history of computing in museums of computer history? Yeah, I guess so. If you're not trying to really do your computing with it, but just show something about it, I think that's okay. Another situation is, suppose you're trying to see what features non-free software has now, so that you can implement the same feature. That's perfectly fine. Why not? I used to do that. We bought a computer, and it would come with Windows on it, and I might play around with it for a little while to see what it was like before the sysadmin erased it. This is a question about the XDG desktop specification, which I just don't know. Sorry. We have to stop. Okay. Well, I'll just keep going, and maybe I can answer all these in 20 minutes. Let's see. Someone's asking me what I think about the invidious front ends for YouTube. I think that's great. And Knitter, I don't use Knitter very much, but I think I've used it a couple of times. It's good. And yeah, those sorts of things are good. Now, there's a special point here. Those are proxies for accessing an existing website that you want to look at. And they save you, they enable you to avoid running the non-free JavaScript that those websites send. So that's good, but the point is, why is it okay that the proxy is a website? It's because what it's doing is accessing another website. So the fact that you're using the web to do this job is not the fault of the proxy. It's part of what you're actually trying to do. To use, if what you were trying to do did not involve looking at a website, then to try to do it for you with a website would be bad. It would mean you'd be losing control. You should have a free program you'd run on your own machine to do the job. But because this is a matter of how you're going to look at something on YouTube or Twitter or Reddit, and those are websites to look at, it's okay for the solution to take the form of a proxy website. How to make free software reliable? It is pretty reliable. Should all software be free? Yes, in the sense that if you get a copy of a program, it should come with the source code and the 4 freedoms. Always. So this question raised whether there's ever a non-free program that is good. Well, in practical terms, it is possible for a non-free program to do something that's very useful. But why is that software non-free? It didn't have to be non-free. If our society were set up differently, that same program could have been written and made free. So the point is, we should change society so that when people develop software, they release that software as free software, and then we wouldn't have to have, there wouldn't be the idea that you're stuck with non-free software and nothing. That's what we have to change. I have trouble understanding this. I just can't make out the words really. Sorry. Is there a social network or messenger with GNU license? I think there are several. I don't use them. See, often I'm doing work and I don't have a net connection. So I just don't use instant type anything. I don't find any kind of social network convenient, even if it respects my freedom. It's better for me to use email. What do you think about people writing you emails and publishing or showing your answers somewhere? Well, I realize that that can happen. So I try to think about what I'm going to say. What, for your opinion, should be improved in Ukraine? Well, this is my third day in Ukraine. So I don't know a lot about Ukraine. Now, yesterday I found out about government forms that you have to sign digitally. And the person who was telling me about this said that he had to sign them with non-free software, and that made him feel really mistreated by the government, except that I hear that today there was a presentation about free software which can sign those things. So, okay, problem seems to be solved or almost finished being solved. Maybe it's necessary to develop convenient user applications to do signatures that the government will accept. If so, then that's an important project to work on. But it was really nice to hear that, just as soon as I heard about the problem, I found out that a solution was already underway. My friend Popka has a birthday today. Well, happy birthday, Popka. And may all your software be free. So I wish you a long life of using Svobodny Volny software. What do you think about Ubuntu? Ubuntu is a distribution of GNU/Linux. So the right term for it would be Ubuntu GNU/Linux. Unfortunately, it is not a free distribution. It contains substantial amounts of non-free software, so I wouldn't recommend using it. What do you think about Qt license? Well, Qt is, if I remember right, is released under GPL version 2, or no, GPL version 3 only. And for the moment, that's fine. But if we ever have a GPL 4, that will be a problem. So I want to talk with Qt's developers about working out a way to advance it to GPL 4 someday, if there is ever a GPL 4. How do you suppose to tax rich people if the government shouldn't have their named lists. Oh, well, yeah, we need to require people to report their income. And when businesses send money to shareholders, for instance, that has to be registered. But ordinary transactions like what you bought in the store, they should not be registered. If you buy or sell a house, that should be registered. But if you buy, say, a chicken, that should not be registered. Will free software supplant proprietary someday? That's up to you. If you fight hard, then yes. Because basically, I don't try to see the future, because that's too hard. What I need to know is what would be good for me to do today. And that's a lot easier, because you don't have to know if you're going to win. When there's any kind of conflict, it's hard to know who's going to win. It's much easier to know how to fight and help your side win. And do your best. When will we see GNU smartphone? Well, I can imagine various meanings for that. The GNU project develops an operating system, not hardware. But there are some smartphone models that can run the GNU system. So maybe they exist already. I don't know exactly what's good or bad about PinePhone, not everything. I have seen one. I know that to turn the microphone on and off, you have to push a tiny dip switch. So if you want the microphone to be on only when you're talking on it, that's hard. Because that means when someone calls you, you've got to push the dip switch with some tool and then answer the phone. So you've got to be really fast at... I can't hear you, what? Okay. I'm afraid I don't understand. It's a PinePhone, and then you said something else I couldn't hear.
You can turn off the network connection
Yeah, I know. What I was thinking is I wanted to turn the microphone on only when I wanted to speak to someone. And that's not easy to do physically because the switch is too small.
Yeah, I know.
Right, well, that's what I wanted to say. Does not free software allow for more piracy to take place? What? Okay, thank you. Speak loud to me always, please. Well, pirates, as far as I know, don't use software. They use guns. Please, if you're talking about sharing copies of things with other people, please do not insult sharing by calling the sharing piracy. That's propaganda for repressive tyrants. So let's reject their terminology. What do you think about biometric passports? I find them menacing. They're a good tool for tyrants. But think about it. Many of you are probably accustomed to having a national ID card. I consider that dangerous. If C language standard is not free, and it isn't, would you say the language is free? As I said, I don't think it's meaningful to ask whether a language is free. The C language has a free compiler, and that's enough. That's enough to enable us to use C programs in freedom, and therefore it's enough. However, I am working on a user's manual, which, when finished, will be free. Can you make a parallel between Linux kernel for GNU software with RISC-V CPU? Well, the RISC-V CPU is a free, well, it's a free CPU design which is being made into physical hardware, and I think that's a very good thing to do. But there is one flaw from my practical point of view, which is they're making a CPU for tiny computers and a RISC-V CPU for server powerful computers, but not one for a laptop, which is what I actually need. I sure wish they would make one for a laptop, and then I'd be able to get a RISC-V laptop that wouldn't need any non-free software. There'd be no management engine. What do you think about Windows 11? It's non-free software, so it's unjust. And we know it is malware in various ways. These days, you can't even start using a computer with Windows without making an account on Microsoft's servers. That's vicious. What do you think about artificial intelligence? Well, I see dangers in it of various kinds. Basically, companies using it can have more power over people. They already have too much power over people. I think it is fine to use this free software if it is dependent on which, oh, wait. Where's the start? I can't tell where this starts. Oh.
This was a follow-up to a question about videos and YouTube and Twitter.
Okay.
Yes, if you remember that.
Okay, my question, do you think it is fine to use this free software if it is dependent on non-free network services?
Yes.
Well, actually, I wouldn't put it that way. It's not the case that NVIDIA is a service of its own, but it's they gratuitously made it dependent on YouTube. That's not what is going on. What's going on is people want to look at things at YouTube, and NVIDIA gives you a way to do that. Now, it doesn't make sense to ask whether a service is free or not if you're trying to use the concept of free software. That's just not applicable to a service, and the reason is there's no way to copy a service, and you can't distribute a service in the same sense. A program is something that you can make copies of, and you can change a copy. And then you can make more copies of that changed one. And some of these copies you can distribute to others. You can give them, you can sell them. These are all things that are possible with software. And because these things are possible, the concept of free software becomes meaningful and interesting. You can't do these things with a service like YouTube. They're just impossible. They don't make sense. And as a result, it doesn't make sense to ask whether YouTube is Libre. It does make sense to ask whether you can access it using exclusively Libre software. That makes sense. But other than that, the aspects of YouTube which are good or bad in a moral sense, they're different aspects. It's not like software. YouTube, we know, is implemented by software running on server computers. But that's irrelevant to our judgment of YouTube because we can't see that. We just know that that's the only way it can be done. But how it's done has no direct effect on us at all. And that's true with any network service. How it's implemented has no direct effect on us. All that matters to us is its input-output behavior. And the input behavior is very important because what data does it get about us? Which inputs are spying on us? That's very important. Which inputs are collecting personal data about us? That's important. And that's something that we can tell by examining the communication. We can never see the implementation, the internals of whatever is going on in the servers, but we can check how much data it's collecting about us because we can see what data are sent to the server. So those are the ways we can form a judgment, a moral judgment about a server. What does it do? What data does it get from us? Because the data it doesn't get, it can't ever show to anyone. And that's the only way we can ever be sure that it won't show data to anyone, is if it doesn't get the data. So I say that's the stage at which we need to make our laws, that we need to check them. What data is the system getting from us? So, I'm finished. Please do not come up here. Please do not come up here. I don't want to be surrounded by people. It's just not safe these days. I'm sorry. And please join the Free Software Foundation as an associate member. And if you wish to, you could say that you want the foundation to carry on based on the course I have set.